Yo, 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 yo. Hey guys, welcome back to another awesome edition of the Best Practices Show podcast. Happy Wednesday, everybody. On Wednesdays, our theme is practical solutions. And one of the solutions you have to have is, how do I pay my team? Have you ever thought to yourself, do I do hourly or salary? What's the right thing to do? The complexity of it is way too much. I can't even give you an answer now. And that's why I brought on Alan Twigg from Bent Ericksen, one of our amazing partners. And I asked him the question, hourly or salary? And he's like, not so fast, Kirk. There are a whole bunch of legal do's and don'ts every dentist must know. And he shares them on this episode. So please listen up. I hope you guys enjoy this. And we'll see you soon. Hey guys, welcome back to the Best Practices Show podcast. You know the jam around here. My job is to answer some of the most difficult questions you have as a dentist and give you some thoughts from some of the best people in the industry. And we're going to do exactly that today with a good friend of mine, Alan Twigg. And if you guys don't know who he is, you need to. He's one of the principal people over at Bent Ericksen, the human resource experts in dentistry. And we're going to create a whole series of hot messes. And his job is to get us out of the hot messes. That's a big promise, isn't it, Alan? So, yeah. And today we're going to be talking about, can I pay an employee a salary? Should I? Can I? I don't know. So, Alan, what do you think? Should we go there today?
Heck yeah. This is a great topic. This one comes up all the time. And, I'll just start it off right now and say, can you pay someone a salary? The answer is yes, with a gigantic asterisk at the end of that. So yes, you can pay people a salary, but there's a whole bunch of other things you need to know. And we'll talk all about that. I would say as a starting point, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, should I pay a salary? Get some clarity around why. Really think about what exactly it is that you're thinking this will solve or benefits you're going to gain. So common ones would be, a lot of times people want to pay a salary because they think they don't have to pay overtime. We'll talk a lot about that here in a little bit. Sometimes we hear about salary because the employees or the doctor are thinking, well, this will be real consistent. I'll just pay a salary, same amount every single pay period, no variation. So that's another common reason for wanting to do a salary. And then a third one would just be kind of this idea of, it'll simplify my time. I won't have to, do all this calculation of hours and wages and overtime, or it'll just simplify everything.
Yeah.
So get some clarity first off of just kind of why you're thinking that salary would be a good idea. And then we're going to dive into the weeds here too as well.
All right, because it's so funny you mentioned those three things, because those are the three boxes I would check intuitively why I would do this in the first place. But I think we should start here. We have so many listeners, especially a lot of new young listeners. I always want people to know, who are they listening to? Give us a little bio. Now, the reason this is important is that somebody might be listening to this podcast going, why would you be the expert on any of this, Alan? So tell us who you are, what you do, and why you're the perfect person to answer these questions.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for that. So, I'm one of the co-owners here at Bent Ericksen Associates. Bent Ericksen Associates is an HR firm. We've been around for over 45 years. And we are a family business. My father and my bonus mom, Adrian, we're all part of this. And this is what we do. This whole world of HR for dental practices and how you navigate it, and the compliance side, also the management side, what happens in this scenario, that scenario, how do you stay up to date? That's all what we do. I've been working in HR for over 18 years. I've been here at Bent Ericksen for 12 years. And so this is all we do. We just help dentists with the HR craziness that comes up and keep people compliant and up to date. So, yeah, it's a fun little world. We like it.
All right. So let's go right there. If I'm a dentist listening to this, okay, let's go to the why. You mentioned the why already, but like give us the high level of this conversation, because you get this question probably every single month, don't you?
Oh, yeah, all the time. Yeah, hourly salary comes up a lot. And so let's start with kind of the biggest conception here with salary, and that is that everyone thinks that if I pay someone a salary, overall my life is just going to get easier. It's going to be simpler. And we have to, before we talk specifically about hourly and salary, we need to talk about a little side thing over here that is exempt and non-exempt. Exempt, non-exempt, it refers to Department of Labor classifications. All employees, everywhere, whether we're talking about a dental practice, a giant corporation, every single employee in any business is either exempt or non-exempt. Those are the only two options. And when we say exempt, we mean that someone who is exempt from overtime and some of the other Fair Labor Standards Act rules and regulations that are out there. And I'm going to keep this as short as I can. When it comes to exempt criteria, because anyone listening is probably going, oh, exempt from overtime. Great. I'll just make everybody exempt and then this will be awesome. It's not that simple. So you can Google this. We can put a link to this in the show notes page. But if you just Google Department of Labor exempt categories, you will get a list from the Department of Labor of these exempt criteria, because not every employee in a business can be exempt. There are certain categories, and in a typical dental practice, there are only two positions that might be able to be classified as exempt. One is the associate dentist. They fall under a category called learned professional. And the other is the office manager, and they would fall under what's called the administrative exemption. Now, when I say office manager, everyone needs to pause and be really careful about this, because as we know, in a typical dental practice, the office manager can be everything from a glorified front desk person who has the title of office manager but spends 99% of their time doing patient care, or they could be a true bona fide office manager where they fully run the show. They do all the hiring, all the decision making. They really run the practice. So just because someone has the title of office manager does not mean that automatically they can meet this exempt classification. You have to get into the weeds about their duties, how much time they spend on each duty, and all of that kind of stuff. But those are the only two positions. So if we're talking about dental assistants, hygienists, front desk, none of them can be classified as exempt. Now, again, I said there are only two options, exempt, non-exempt. So that means if someone is not able to meet exempt criteria, that means they are automatically non-exempt. That means they are not exempt from all of these overtime rules. And that simply means that all of these overtime rules and provisions now apply to those employees. Does that kind of make sense? I know that's kind of a lot right off the bat.
It does. Now, you know, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but does non-exempt mean they can't be full-time? That's the question. They could be full-time, but they still have to follow the rules or provisions of non-exempt, correct?
Correct. Yeah, non-exempt and the term we would use for your thing about full-time, part-time, we call that employee classification.
Okay.
And employee classification is, full-time, part-time, how many hours a week you work. Are you a temporary employee versus a regular employee? And that does not matter in this world of exempt, non-exempt. So, great question. And if someone is non-exempt, they could be full-time, they could be part-time, doesn't matter.
Okay. And just
now,
go ahead. You
ahead.
Keep going, because I think I know where you're going with this. Keep going.
Well, so this is kind of then one of these things where it's like a domino effect.
Right.
So let's take a dental hygienist, for example. So a dental hygienist can't be classified as exempt. That means they're non-exempt. That means all these rules about overtime and other things apply to that person. So that means that as an employer, to protect ourselves, we have to be able to prove. If someone from the state labor board or the federal labor board came in and said, hey, prove to me on paper that Shelley, your dental hygienist, did not work overtime. We as the employer have to show them the hours worked and the pay provided and all of that to ensure that we did what we were supposed to do. So the only way to really prove that is to have our employees clocking in and out. That means we have nice payroll records of how many hours they worked per week, or if you're in California, how many hours they worked per day, so that you satisfy daily and weekly overtime requirements. So that means, again, starting at the top, they have to be clocking in and out. That means we're dealing with all that stuff that we don't like to deal with of, well, what if they forget to clock in or out? What if they miss their punch, and correcting all of that in the payroll system. And it also means that when we pay someone a salary and they are one of these non-exempt employees, we as the employer, we have a choice to make when someone works fewer hours than they normally do, or fewer hours than what they're supposed to work for their salary. So we can say to someone, okay, I'm going to pay you a salary, and it's for, let's say, 32 hours of work per week. We're a typical practice, 4 days a week, 8 hours a day. What if that person in a given week, let's say, only works 22 hours because they take some extra time off, or the practice is closed for a week or a couple days or something like that? In that scenario, when you're paying someone a salary, you as the employer have a choice to make. You can either continue to pay them their same salary, or if you want, you can reduce their salary down and, in a sense, calculate kind of per hour what they're doing, and that you can adjust the salary down for that week. Now, that door swings the other way, though. Let's say someone normally is supposed to work 32 hours a week, and this week they worked 38 hours. A common misconception about salary is people think, well, if I pay someone a salary, they can work 50 hours one week, they can work 20 hours the next week, and it doesn't matter. I don't have to pay overtime. I'm just going to pay them their salary and everything's cool. That only works if someone is exempt. That thing we talked about earlier, where you meet one of those criteria, like an associate dentist or maybe a bona fide office manager. If you meet an exempt classification, yes, someone can work 80 hours one week, 10 hours the next week, doesn't matter. But that does not apply to non-exempt employees. So it's a little confusing with this stuff, but just know that for your dental assistants, hygienists, front desk, and so on, they're non-exempt. And if you are paying them a salary, that's not a free-for-all. You can't just have them work as many hours as you want. You actually have to set a line in the sand, and this should be documented, that says, I'm paying you this much money, and I expect you to work this many hours per week.
Okay.
And that needs to be real close to what they normally work. And the last thing I'll say about that is this. If you're setting your salary for, say, 32 hours a week, and they work 38 hours a week, you do have to pay them more. And I know that doesn't make sense, or that sounds counterintuitive, because again, we get drilled into our minds this idea that if I pay a salary, they can work as many hours as I want them to work, or it doesn't matter, I don't have to track it. That's not true for non-exempt employees. So the end result of all of this is that if you're paying non-exempt employees a salary, they still have to clock in and out, because we have to track and prove that we didn't have them work overtime. And if they work more than they usually do, we have to pay them more. And if they work less, we might end up adjusting their salary down. So it just means that it's kind of a pain to pay a non-exempt person a salary, because each pay period, you might be constantly fluctuating that pay up and down, and you got to still hound people because they didn't clock in or out. So this idea that if I pay someone a salary, I avoid overtime is not the case, because we're talking about these non-exempt employees. Overtime still applies. And this idea that if I pay a salary, it makes my life super simple and easy, it just doesn't, because the administrative workload goes up.
Yeah.
So sorry, there's a whole bunch that I just threw at you guys, but that's kind of the domino there.
That's totally cool. I love this. This is what the whole podcast is about, like getting straight to the point here. We're 13 minutes into this interview, and you've already talked me out of employing anybody as a salaried employee in a dental office, because of the complexity, but maybe we can unravel this. I already have a question I was thinking about if I'm a dentist listening. Okay, so Alan, let's go here. Let's say I have a team member all my team, we work Monday through Thursday, but we do CE on Fridays. Legally, I'm required to pay them for attending the CE. Would that fall in the same type of payment? Like, just walk me through the complexity of that, because a lot of dentists listening to this love to do CE on top of a regular work week, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we will probably at some point do a whole separate episode on CE, because that's a big major topic, and there's a lot of misunderstandings about that. But yeah, if someone normally works Monday through Thursday and then we're doing a CE thing on Friday, yes, absolutely, that would qualify as extra hours, extra work in that work week. So yeah, we would absolutely have to increase their salary for that work week by a corresponding amount. There's some trickiness to it based on the CE and whether we're paying people their regular rate or a different rate of pay. We can get into the weeds on that. But yeah, basically you would have to increase their salary for that work week because of the CE training.
Yeah. So, well, good. And now,
and the same would be true if you're doing, a marketing thing on a weekend, or even something maybe on a Friday, you want to do a team retreat or a little team, big special team meeting or something like that. Same kind of deal. You'd have to increase the salary for that.
Right. Now, on the same lines of all of this, I get this question at least once a month, sometimes several times a month. Okay. So as I'm growing my dental practice and I want to go away 4 to 6, maybe 8 weeks a year, how do I keep my team employed? Because they have their mindset around a certain number. And let me say this about the team members that may be listening. My heart goes out to you, because the predictability of the pay is very important. It's important for everybody. I don't care who you are. You, as a provider for your household, you need the predictability of that revenue. And one of the challenges most dentists, if you're listening to this, is how do I unlink me working with their pay? I'm just going to throw that big question to you. Can you help us unpackage that one?
Yeah, absolutely. And this came up just recently on the BPA group. Yeah, it's a typical issue, or it's a typical problem. And I think that you want to absolutely be mindful of this, because different practices are gone, or, in a sense, not working for different numbers of weeks. And certainly a bigger office that has multiple associates and so on, they can potentially have a doctor out, and for the team members, they continue to just work their regular hours, depending on the position. And so as a smaller practice, you want to be mindful of this, because, yeah, it can be something that might potentially drive employees away if it's a lot of weeks throughout the year and if they're not being paid. So one option would be what we would call time off with pay. And that's separate from vacation or PTO or sick leave. Time off with pay is where I, as the dentist, say to my employees, I am going to close the practice X number of weeks per year. And during those weeks, in a sense, I will continue to pay you your normal weekly amount of pay that you typically would make. Obviously, that's a cost for those weeks. And depending on what's happening that week, whether there's hygiene happening or any other work, that can potentially be a cost to you. Now, that does touch on those weeks as the dentist. Maybe you're off, but maybe the team is still working. Maybe they're calling patients, scheduling, working on projects that need to get done, new technology, still doing hygiene. There's a lot of things that can potentially still be done on those weeks that are at least productive. But it is a choice, and it's something that each dentist kind of has to almost like run the numbers and work on that. I will say, without a doubt, dentists are some of the most hardworking and stressful people out there. And so taking that time off to rest and recharge, absolutely critical. Got to build it in. It makes you a much better practitioner and a better employer and a better spouse and all of that. So I think that even if it is something that costs you in the end, that it's worth it overall. So something to think about with that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I was going to say that too. As a practice owner, I think one of the biggest responsibilities you have is to make sure that your practice is profitable, meaning what your team compensation costs are, and they're not linked by how much you're gone from the practice. Now, I know that sounds difficult, but you have to be able to figure that piece out. And when you do, you'll go, I'm so glad I figured this piece out, because without it comes small thinking. You're going to feel tied to the chair. They're going to feel a little resentful when you're gone a lot and they're not getting paid. And that doesn't lend itself to finding and building a great team. I know my team members have big responsibilities, and I feel responsible for making sure that the mouths get fed and their responsibilities are met. So that's my full responsibility as an employer. Now, how all the details work are something we can chat about, but I agree with you. I don't think you should send people home and tell them not to work. But let me package a question right in the middle of that. So, if I'm going away and I take 6 weeks of vacation, but my team members I have vacation policy. Let's say first year they get 2, third year they get 3, and fourth year they maybe get 4. How do I leverage the whole, I'm going to be gone for 6 weeks. They get to be, do they have to go when I go? Do they get flex weeks? I know we're kind of getting in the weeds there, but it helps me understand this whole thing. And I do like the idea of like, hey, if you're a dentist listening to this, there's a lot to be done at your practice. And your team members would appreciate the fact that they get to go to work and you're not there. Like, one of their favorite things is when you go away. They actually like you more when they go. And they love the idea of, hey, listen, we're going to go to work and we're going to do these things and get caught up. And I get paid for this. And yet we're still not seeing patients and you're away. So I don't know if that's a question, but I was just going to throw that message to you and have you kind of decode that for us. Did I make any sense at what I just said?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a great, and I love the way that you presented that, because that's the way people kind of think about it, because there's just all these things and they're all kind of floating around and it's hard to, get it in order. So one of your questions was, when the doctor goes out on vacation, can, in a sense, the team be required to go on vacation at the same time? The answer to that is yes. So you could require that, in a sense, in our office, that, your vacations are my vacations and we all take vacation at the same time. Now, I will tell you, I don't recommend that, just because it can be very limiting for folks. If it's not like they can always plan their sister's wedding or at the time that you're off or something like that. So you certainly want to be mindful of that. I would say that, for some of the smaller practices that are startups or just, still kind of getting going, maybe you kind of have to do something like that in the beginning. Maybe you figure out a way to reward people later for that. But let's say that the numbers just don't add up. Let's say that you're gone 6 weeks and they only get a maximum of 3 weeks. So you have a 3-week difference here. In a scenario like that, again, you have a choice. You can pay them, it's sort of that time off with pay. You can not pay them. You can have certain people off, like your dental assistants off, other people are working. And the thing also to be aware of, and this is not a big deal, but it's something to be aware of, is that if you have employees off for a period of time like that, a week or so, they can file for unemployment. And I know that whenever I say unemployment, people's hearts start beating out of their chest and freaking out. So just know that from our perspective, unemployment, it's not a big deal. If you really sit down and you look at rates, and every state's different, but if you really sit down and look at rates and how much you pay for unemployment, if your rates were to go up and all that, it's not a huge amount of money. And compared to all the other things that can happen, like a state labor board investigation or a employment lawsuit, or even just the cost of turnover with having employees leave, unemployment is not a big deal.
Right.
And I'll say this till I'm blue in the face, because a lot of times people will make big, major HR decisions based on this idea of, well, I don't want people to get unemployment, because if they get unemployment, and don't make decisions based on unemployment. It's not a big deal. But just be aware that if you do shut down the practice for a week and there's no work available for people, they can't come in and do projects, none of that is available, they're totally off, then technically people could file for unemployment. They might get it, they might not get it, but either way, don't freak out.
Yeah. So would you agree with this? I've had a lot of dentists. I've been doing this for 30 years. So, a lot of dentists, they might take 6 weeks of vacation In that scenario where a team member is allowed 3 weeks of vacation, they say something like this: we encourage you to take your time off when we take time off, but in the event you need to take one of those weeks that we are working, I just ask that you fill out a form, and it's a vacation request form. I had one dentist, he's like, I want it 6 months in advance. Now, the important thing is it's a form and it's a request form. It doesn't mean it's granted, but he's like, I very rarely ever denied it. The thing that it does is it creates a system that it allows me to have a countermeasure for that well in advance. And yes, you could submit it like a month in advance or 2 months in advance, but it's just a respectful system that allows me to say, hey, listen, you go to your sister's wedding, I want you to be there, type of a thing. Anything you would say about that kind of thinking?
Oh, yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, you can absolutely say those kinds of things like, hey, we would prefer if you took your vacations when we're already off and not seeing patients. Absolutely, it is always a request. As an employer, you are not legally required to approve every single vacation request that's out there. If you're in a state that has mandatory sick leave is a whole separate thing. And if you're bundling PTO or sick leave and vacation into PTO, that's a different story. But in general, with vacation requests, sister's wedding, something like that, no, you do not have to approve that. Obviously, yeah, you want to do right by your employees and try to do that as much as you can. So yeah, I mean, all of that is reasonable. Every office can set what they want their time, thing to be as far as how far in advance. You can have a line about, exceptions will be made at the doctor's discretion for extenuating circumstances if, some unexpected vacation thing pops up. So yeah, all of that is totally reasonable. And yeah, we definitely recommend using a request form of some sort, documenting that and having that all in writing so that there's no he said, she said, or misunderstandings or any of that. Yeah.
Right. Let me throw another term at you. So what we've been talking about is annual salary, but there's another term, daily salary. Can you define what that is and why they're different and how they're different?
Yeah, daily salary, somewhere along the way years ago, I have no idea where it came from, but it got really popular with hygienists for a while. And we see this most often with hygienists who, just for whatever reason, the employer likes this idea of saying, okay, you're going to see 8 patients a day. I'm going to pay you X amount of dollars per day. And that way it's kind of the same thing. The hygienist says, okay, every day that I work, I'm going to make this much money. Multiply it out by this many days per week, and that's what my salary will work out to be. All of the same issues that we talked about earlier apply to daily salary. So this idea of they're still non-exempt employees, that means we still need to track hours. We still need to know how many total hours they work for the week. If we're talking about a practice in California, we need to know how many hours they're working per day so that we're factoring in daily overtime. And also this conception that, if I pay someone a daily salary, then they can work, 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, doesn't matter. That also does not apply. You still are defining it's this much in daily salary for this many hours of work. And it does mean that if for some reason the hygienist wants to leave early and not see a couple patients in the afternoon, yes, you can reduce that daily salary. And it does mean that if there's a patient that goes way long at the end of the day and they have to stay late, you may have to pay them more in daily salary in order to compensate them appropriately for that. So it's another method. Like I said, we see it most often with hygienists. It could be with any employee in the practice, but it has all the same pitfalls and disadvantages of doing the kind of the weekly or the biweekly salary as well.
Yeah, this is such great therapy for me because I get all these questions and they're not my swim lanes, as you can imagine, on HR. Our job is the business of the practice, but the HR thing is sticky and it's different in each state. That's why we depend on Alan so much because the complexity is just high. Can I ask you a couple more questions? Now, let's go back to the associate dentist being an exempt. Can you give me the ins and outs on salary regarding that, like trends and best practices around what a dentist, like, so let's say a dentist is listening right now. They're like, I gotta do something for my new associate. How should I think well about that?
Yeah, this one is a kind of a rabbit hole a little bit. So, associates, the most common payment method for an associate would be some sort of base salary and then some sort of commission. And this one gets into a bunch of nuances around state rules and wage and hour laws around this idea of making sure that someone is paid. Well, let me back up and say, under the exempt criteria, there is a salary requirement. So for someone who is classified as exempt, you have to pay them a minimum salary. And I won't get into the numbers because
Right.
it fluctuates a bit and all of that. But the bottom line is there is a minimum salary. So let's say we're paying an associate dentist based on a commission, and maybe that's a commission based on production or a commission based on collections. That's fine, but we still have to adhere to those minimum salary requirements. And there are state minimum requirements in certain states, and then there's also the federal minimum requirements. So the whole thing is pretty complicated, and it can kind of get into this thing where it is a little bit of work to have to, pay the minimum, but there's the commission, and sometimes you reduce the salary because the commissions are really high, and you got to make sure you're meeting the minimum requirements and all of that. So it is pretty tricky, and I would definitely recommend that folks chat with someone like us or someone who really understands this in depth. Some accountants and CPAs do understand kind of these minimum salary and Department of Labor requirements. Some of them don't. But it is something that you got to be really careful about. I will say though that paying an associate dentist a commission, whether it's production or collections, and there's plenty of debate about that. I don't really have a strong opinion about it, but that's absolutely the normal way of doing it, is paying a commission based on that, and that's totally fine. It incentivizes folks in various ways. Again, production versus collection, different schools of thought, but yeah, that's kind of the standard way of doing it.
Okay. And I want to go back to salary in a second, but I have to ask this question because I get it all the time, is working interviews. We're going to have somebody come in and like, I know the working interview is a different conversation, but pay, like people say, well, I'm going to have her come in for a working interview. And I'm like, I don't even, oh gosh. And then they'll ask me, well, how do I pay them? Can you just open up that one for me? Explain.
Sure.
I'm sure you hear that one too.
Oh, big time. Yeah. So, oh boy. So working interviews. So first of all, as the title implies, working interview. So the assumption with a working interview is that this person, during the time that they're doing this working interview, they are working on actual patients. These are actual patients who are paying the practice. Therefore, it's productive work. Therefore, they are doing actual work. And the government, if someone's doing actual productive work, the government does not allow them to volunteer their time for that. You are not allowed to volunteer your time for a for-profit organization. You can volunteer your time for a nonprofit organization. We've all done that, doing, community service stuff or helping out with a nonprofit. That's a different story. But employees or workers or candidates, nobody can volunteer their time for a for-profit business. So, because it is work, and because the government is defining it as work, and because it can't be a volunteer, that means you got to pay them. And the government doesn't have a special category that says that you can pay them in a gift card or you can pay them, cash under the table. It has to be paid just like any other employee. And everyone's now, the wheels are turning where it's like, oh my gosh, well, if I'm paying them, that means I got to run it through payroll. Yes. That means you got to have them fill out a W-4 and an I-9 and all the other, required paperwork. In some states, there's a state version of the W-4 form. You have to do all of that. You got to run it through payroll. You have to pay them at the end of the day. That means you can't just wait until the next payday. You got to pay them at the end of the day and give them a paper check. So working interviews, the advantages of a working interview is that you can potentially see this person working on actual patients for an entire day, potentially 2 days. So you can gain a lot of insight from this person and how they work, but there's a whole bunch of disadvantages as well in terms of the pay. They can potentially file unemployment because you're paying them. If you don't hire them, you're their last employer. There's workers' comp issues if they injure themselves or have a needle stick while they're working. There's also the disadvantage of this is someone that you basically just met, and now you're letting them work on your patients. Does this hygienist actually have a license? Have you verified that yet? Do they actually have, good bedside manner and personal skill? We don't know that yet.
Right.
And now here's a patient that you want to continue to come back to your practice, and maybe they're good, maybe they're not good. So I will say this. The other option, there is another option. The other option is what we call a skills assessment. A skills assessment is not a working interview. It's something totally different. In a skills assessment, the person is not doing productive work. So they are not working on your actual patients. The easiest way to think of a skills assessment is it's like role playing. So if it's a front desk person, they're sitting at the front desk and maybe the doctor calls in and they answer the phone and we kind of hear what their voice sounds like on the phone. If they say they have skills with Dentrix, we can have them, do some fake patient entry stuff. If they're a dental assistant, again, we can have maybe an employee sitting in the chair and the doctor's there and, okay, hand me this, hand me that. You're kind of doing some role playing with that. Same thing with a hygienist. You can have the hygienist working on, say, the dentist and doing some of the prophy work there. But again, it is role playing. We are not working on actual patients who are paying. This is just role playing with the doctor and other employees. With a skills assessment, it needs to be no more than 1 to 2 hours. And because they're not doing productive work, we are not paying them. We're not running anything through payroll. We're not paying them a gift card. We're not doing cash on the table. This is simply just role playing as part of the interview process. And for both of those scenarios, working interviews and skills assessments, we have a form for each of those scenarios. Folks that are clients of ours have access to these, but it basically, you have the person fill it out when they come in, and it confirms that in the case of a skills assessment, this is just part of the interview process. This is not a guarantee of employment. This is not us saying that we're hiring you. Same thing for working interviews. It's us saying yes, we're paying you for this time, but this is all part of the interview process. It's not a guarantee of employment. You're not an employee, et cetera, et cetera. So the bottom line is, yes, you can do either one of those, but you have to do them all properly. And where people get in trouble is they kind of take sort of a pick and choose approach of what they like and what they don't like out of each of those. And they say, oh, well, I'm going to make them work 8 hours on patients, but I'm not going to pay them, or or I'm going to do role playing, but it's for the whole day. And so it's when people blend the two that they get in trouble.
Yeah. Alan, this is so good. And if you guys are freaked out by now, 36 minutes into the podcast, our goal is not to do that. The name of the podcast is Best Practices. I want you to learn how to do this the right way. And I'll just tell you, this is way too much for me to even think about. This is all we do. And so that's why Bent Ericksen is just a great partner for us. I can dish him all this stuff. And you work in all 50 states, right?
Yep.
And I'm selling you right now, but I'm telling you guys, it's too easy to work with these guys. They know they have forms for all this stuff. It's just too easy. And I'm just so grateful for you guys. Now, I want to go back to the original topic here, which is salary. And I'm just going to go there. I want you to sell me on putting anybody in a dental practice on salary. And I know you're being professional right now and you have to, but as a dentist listening, is there any reason, I want you to, should I have anybody on salary or should everybody just be hourly?
I would say there are kind of two scenarios where salary might make sense. One scenario would be that true bona fide office manager that you've done all the checking with us or somebody and they meet the exempt criteria, because that is great. As an office manager, you kind of shift your thinking, and now they're paid based on delivering certain deliverables. They're not paid on working 8 hours. They're paid based on growing the practice, training and motivating a really awesome team. Those are the standards by which we now measure whether this office manager is kicking butt or not. And in that regard, then you pay them a salary, predictably how much you're going to pay this person every pay period. They have predictability. And because they meet exempt criteria, some weeks they might work extra hours, some weeks they might work a little bit less, but as long as they're delivering those things that you want, it's a win-win all the way around. The second scenario where salary might work is for a practice where, for whatever reason, your schedule and your patients and the work you do is incredibly consistent. And whatever that is, where it's just, you just have those wonderful patients that don't cancel, or the type of treatment that you book and how you book it. It's just like the amount of fluctuation in weekly hours among the team is just minimal. And you don't work extra Fridays and you don't work extra, it's just consistent. In that scenario, salary might be great, because all those administrative burdens I mentioned of, you got to lower the salary and increase the salary, and what about overtime and all, you don't have to worry about all that stuff. But most practices, of course, the schedule does fluctuate and people do cancel, and it just varies too much. So aside from that, though, honestly, we don't really recommend it that much because of all of those administrative burdens of having to adjust things, and you still have to have people clock in and out, and then you got to deal with all of that stuff. So it's honestly easier just to pay people an hourly wage, and you can still make a promise to your team that says, look, I will do everything I can to have your schedule be as consistent as possible, which means your pay on a weekly, monthly, annual basis is going to be as consistent as possible. But of course, as an employer, there are times that you may have to shut things down a little bit, or work extra hours, fewer hours, whatever it is. But You got to do what you got to do with that.
Yeah. I have so many other, are you good on time? I have like one or two more questions.
Oh, sure. Yeah, let's do it.
All right. This is a hot one for us because, our whole core purpose is better practice, better life. So I can't even count the number of practices we know of or coach that work straight 8s. They'll do 7 to 3, and bypass a lunch. Now, legally, they're required in each state to give team members the 1 hour type of thing. In California, it's a different country. I've heard, through other people that if people work 12 hours, you actually have to give them 2 full hours for lunch. You're required by law. So I don't want to get into the stickiness of that. But let's say I'm a dentist and I do a straight 8, 7 to 3, or 8 to 4. Okay. Now, let's talk about hourly pay and pay in regards to that type of employment. Anything I should know?
Yeah, so I'll correct a couple little things you said. So the whole break and lunch thing varies from state to state. So there's actually not a kind of a standard rule that every single practice in the entire country has to do this. There are some states that have literally absolutely no break or lunch rules whatsoever. You could technically make an employee work 8, 10, 12 hours straight with no breaks, and that would technically be legal. It's obviously not recommended that you do that, but in those states, yes, you could get away with it. So yeah, you do need to learn your particular state, what the rest break rules are and what the lunch rules are. Some states have a rule around rest breaks, so 10, 15-minute breaks, but they may not have a rule about lunches, and in other states it's the opposite. At the federal level, federal government does not say that you have to give breaks, but they do say that if you give a break, there are some stipulations with it. And one of those stipulations is that if that break that you give someone is 20 minutes or less, it has to be paid. So this one confuses or surprises some people because, maybe an employee comes to you and says, hey, look, I got a call from the school. My kid's having an issue. I got to call the school. Can I step out? And the employer will kind of want the employee to maybe clock out for that 10, 15 minutes that they're calling the school. And again, if they're in a state where there is a state rule, typically those breaks are required to be paid by the state level. And now at the federal level, again, if it's 20 minutes or less, it's got to be paid. So if you say to the employee, yeah, sure, go call the school, do what you need to do, it has to be paid. You can't have the employee clock out for that. There are some other things around nursing, breastfeeding stuff. That one also varies quite a bit from state to state. And then California has its own special thing for sure. Yeah, there's stipulations around full day, 12-hour days, double shifts. There's a lot there.
So just to recap, if you're a dentist that works a straight 8, in some states you're not required to pay them for the hour that I thought they might be entitled to. That's not true. So know your state law. Number 2 is based on an hourly situation with non-exempt employees, it's pretty straight math. I mean, you're just paying them for those hours they're working, and that's it. And they clock in and clock out.
Yeah, exactly. So hourly, it's real simple. Clock in, clock out. The rest breaks are almost always paid, and then the lunches typically are unpaid if they're 30 minutes or so or more. And then for the salary employees, when you sit down and you calculate, let's say it's a non-exempt employee, so we got to do that thing where we say, okay, you're paid this for this many hours of work. In that scenario, when you do that calculation, you're going to factor in the lunches. You'll say, we work this many hours total, but one of those hours is a lunch. You're not working, so that works out to be, let's say, 7 hours per day. So 7 times 4, you kind of run the numbers with that. Now, you do need to be a little bit careful and kind of pad that, because as we know, sometimes the patient before lunch runs a little bit long. Right. The patient comes in early. So you kind of want to pad that a little bit. And it might mean that some weeks you're paying people a little bit more than you necessarily have to, because maybe they are taking that full hour, but you're kind of padding it by 20 or 30 minutes. But again, it's just one of those things where you just kind of like run the numbers and kind of go, okay, would I rather have this or that? And you just pick and decide what's best for you.
Okay. So on those lines, I'm a geek about this stuff. So let's say I am doing a 7 to 3, and then my team members come in for a huddle. I want them to be in a huddle 15 minutes early. And there are some practices that do 6:30 where a team member comes in, gets their charts ready, all that kind of stuff. And then we have the huddle. Anything we should know about that as far as pay goes?
It's basically the same as any other sort of work hour. So the huddle or staying after the last patient to do notes or clean up or set up for the next day, all of that is work hours. So yeah, it's a good thing you want to think about it as work time and not patient hours, especially for like a hygienist, for example. So huddles count as work time, cleanup, notes, et cetera. All of that counts as work time. So in that regard, yeah, maybe your patient hours are 7 to 3, but your actual employee working schedule hours are maybe 6:30 to 3:30 or something like that. So yeah, you just got to factor that in.
Buddy, you are the best. I have no doubt the series we're going to create, I'm going to have so many questions for you. I just value our relationship so much. And I want you to tell people, like, if they're listening, how they find out more about what you do. But before we do, give us some final thoughts on our conversation. Any way you'd wrap this up in a little bow?
Well, yeah, I would just say that one of the biggest takeaways would be, don't assume that if you pay someone a salary, it's a get out of jail free card and you get to do whatever you want. So it's more complex than that. If you have an associate dentist, then reach out to us or somebody and just kind of make sure that you're setting them up properly. We didn't even touch on 1099 contractor stuff. That's a whole other rabbit hole with associates. If you have a 1099 contractor, please call us. Let's make sure that that's set up properly. And then, for your office managers, if you do have an office manager, again, feel free to reach out to us. The starting point, if you want to get into the weeds with exempt with office managers, is start with a job description and start applying, in a sense, how many hours they spend per week on each duty. That's a little homework assignment. If you've got an office manager and you want to think about exempt criteria for the manager, start with the job description, how many hours a week they're doing each thing. And then also just, again, think about what your intention is with salary. Is it about making your life easier? Is it about avoiding overtime? Are you doing it for the employee's benefit, but it's kind of creating more work on your part or maybe your office manager's part if they're the ones doing payroll? So you just want to think through all of that. And it's one of those things where, like everything in HR, it's like, can you do it? Yes. And got to kind of know the downsides too.
Buddy, you're the best. All right. So if I'm listening, I want to know more about what you do or get in touch with you. I know a lot of people will want to do that. How do I find you? Where do I go? How does this work?
Yeah, folks can reach out to us at our website. It's bentericksen.com. We can put a link to that in the notes page. And folks can reach out to me. My email is just alan@bentericksen.com. Got our phone number as well. You can find us on Facebook. And, I would just say overall, think of us in the way that you think about your accountants or your lawyer that did your associate contract, or just these things that, you just outsource it to somebody who really knows that world. And yeah, you could do all of this yourself. You can learn, research, take classes, spend hours on the internet, but I think it's just really easy to work with us. And this is all we do. It's just HR. We don't do accounting. We don't do insurance. We don't do we just do HR, and we love to do it. And so we're here to support you guys. We've got documentation like manuals, job descriptions, forms, all of that stuff ready to go so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. We keep everything up to date over time. So when there's any change in your state rules or federal rules, we just automatically update you. Super simple. And then we also have a whole team of HR specialists. So all these questions about, can I do this? Can I do that? What do I do in this scenario? Oh my gosh, my employee just said this. What do I do? You can just pick up the phone, call us. We'll usually get you taken care of that same day. You can send us an email as well. Lots of options. So we just make it super simple and easy so that this whole messy world of HR is just simple and easy and confidence boosting. So that's what we do.
You're the best. And I'll just say this, one of the best investments you'll ever make as a practice owner is having Bent Ericksen on your team. Super easy to work with, and they handle all these complexities. So don't even think about it. Just do it. So, all right. And then also, if you're listening to the podcast and you've got some crazy HR questions, send them to me, kirk@actdental.com. We're going to continue to do this series because we want to decode the stuff that you're dealing with. Like, just email me the question, and I'll ask Alan directly on the podcast. We won't mention your name, but I'll get answers from the real experts on some of these HR questions that you want to know about. I want to know about them too. So send me the questions. So Alan, thank you so much, brother. Appreciate you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. Always a fun topic for me. So yeah,
awesome.
Happy to help.
Awesome. We'll stick around while we say goodbye to everybody else. But thank you guys for listening to the Best Practices Show podcast. I hope you enjoyed that. We're going to keep bringing you real answers from real questions that you have, and giving them to the experts and sharing them on the podcast. So keep sending us these things. And I don't know how this is working, but thank you guys for sharing all these episodes and telling your friends. It keeps growing. I don't know how, but we're going to keep bringing it. So until we see you guys next time, or you hear from us next time, keep watching or keep listening to the Best Practices Show. You guys enjoy your day.